Henry George was an American politician in the 19th century known for popularizing a philosophy that could revolutionize the economy. This would come to be known as Georgism. The basic idea of Georgism is that anyone who owns land is forced to pay tax on the value of that land value tax, if you will. This would replace all other taxes, meaning you would no longer pay tax on your income or VAT if you're living in the UK. Instead, landowners would pay this land value tax, which would then be distributed back to society as a citizen's dividend. After all, does the land we all live on not belong to its citizens? The biggest winners in a Georgist society are the poorest among us, with the biggest losers being landlords, the people that very often exploit the need for housing for absurd monetary gain. The Landlord's Game was a board game created by Elizabeth Magie circa 1903. Through its prosperity rule set, it was intended to highlight the strength of Georgist ideals, with players traversing a square board in order to purchase land which would benefit everyone through the distribution of, say it with me now, land value tax. However, there was another set of rules that you could use, which would instead demonstrate the failings of modern society. The Monopolist rules. This was a cutthroat game, where the correct way to win would see everyone else losing. The cooperative element had been totally severed, the most fortunate players building out monopolies whilst the unlucky ones just tried to avoid going bankrupt. If any of this sounds familiar, you probably recognise that this is the gist of Monopoly, the wildly successful board game which has generated trillions in income since 1935. The idea for Monopoly was ripped directly from the Landlord's Game, stripping away its prosperity rules in favour of the merciless Monopolist rule set, which had been far more popular with players. Elizabeth Magie's name would be lost to time, receiving only $500 for the game's patent, which, accounting for inflation, still wasn't enough to recuperate the costs it took to develop the game. When it was sold by its creator, Charles Darrow. Perhaps more notably, the Landlord Game's anti-capitalist overtones would be reduced to a whisper, as this was no longer an educational tool, but a product that would spotlight humongous wealth gaps without providing a solution for them. Although Monopoly itself spawned thousands of unique iterations, often tailored to specific locations or IPs, I want to hone in on a game that was almost certainly inspired by the board game, the studio formerly known as Enix's Itadaki Street. In Itadaki Street, you purchase shops which other players would land on to give you money. You could invest in these properties to increase their value, making them more expensive to other players. But you could also buy stocks in each board's various districts, which would increase in value as the shops in those districts saw further investment. The series would begin to incorporate characters and locations from Dragon Quest, even crossing over with Final Fantasy and, ultimately, Mario. Which brings us, at long last, the series' first title to release in the West, 2011's Itadaki Street Wii, also known as Fortune Street, or Boom Street. I'm not going to rant about this again. Despite having interest in the game as a child, I just didn't understand it. I loved Monopoly, but the stock market here bewildered me, and I didn't know anyone who could explain it. That said, my interest never quite dwindled to naught, and around 14 years later, I'd find myself returning to these streets using the Dolphin emulator and Parsec to play online. Myself and 3 others would then make our way through each of the game's 24 boards over the course of a few months. Unsatisfied still, we'd boot up the Kirby Street mod and play through that game's 24 boards, which I would argue are a considerable improvement on the base games. Nowadays, we find ourselves in the depths of Custom Street World Tour, staring down boards that perhaps never should have seen the light of day. Point is, we're all hooked on the game, a game that is almost entirely decided by the rolls of a dice. A game that simulates the wealth inequality present in real life, where your shitty luck can result in total bankruptcy, where your success is enabled by another's failure. Deep down, I suspect we are all a little bit envious of those who achieved amazing things without having to try. We'd joke that someone was a nepo baby if something extremely fortunate befell them at the beginning of the game, a way to cope with the jealousy as we wish something similar would happen to us. There is a way for players to somewhat cooperate in Fortune Street, buying stocks in the same district while the owner of shops in that district continues to invest. The prosperity method, if you will. And yet, these games aren't nearly as thrilling as those where a player lands on the most expensive shop on the board in a single turn, altering the entire game's dynamic. We, as a people, find the things we shouldn't do tantalizing, and view the things we don't have through envious green lenses. Fortune Street, and by extension, Monopoly, allows us to indulge in these faults of character in a medium that doesn't harm anyone. Unfortunately, this genre is a reflection of its design, with greedy capitalistic forces coming out on top, leaving Elizabeth Maggie, the woman who worked the hardest, in their dust. It's all too often the case that a piece of art is the most poignant when the artist suffers at the hands of the thing they sought to critique.